The situation with the organization is handled. The man is useful, more useful than he knows. I've given him enough access to believe he's building something of his own. He's not. Everything he touches in this city touches me first. His name is Kang Dae. He works for me. He just doesn't know yet that he always will.
I played it 4 times before I moved. 4 times. Not because I didn't hear it the first time. I heard it the first time. Every word, every syllable. The casual confidence of a man who had never once in his life questioned whether he deserved the room he was standing in. I heard it perfectly. I played it 4 times because some truths are so large that your body needs extra time to build a container strong enough to hold them. That was my father's voice, and the name he said. The name he said the way you say the name of something you own was Kang Dae. I sat at my desk and I did not move for a long time. Outside my clinic window, the neighborhood was waking up. Ordinary, unhurried, completely unaware that 40 feet away, a woman's entire understanding of the last 2 years of her life had just cracked open at the foundation. I had been sitting in this chair 30 minutes ago, feeling something I had not let myself feel in years. Like it was over. Like I had won. Like the woman who dropped her speech on a lecture hall floor and walked into a storm with nowhere to go had finally, completely, arrived somewhere safe. 30 minutes ago, I believed that. Then I pressed play. I looked at my hands on the desk, the same hands that stitched him closed in the rain. The same hands that signed documents that put my medical license on the line for him. The same hands that had learned, slowly, without ceremony, what it felt like to be chosen by someone who did not need anything from me. I thought about the night we met. The alley, the mud, the rain coming down like the sky had something to prove. The moment I said my name, Aaliyah. 1 second, 1 single second before he gave me his back. I had told myself it was pain, shock, the controlled stillness of a man trained to manage his reactions even when his body was failing him. I was a diagnostician. I did not believe in pauses that meant nothing. And here is the thing about being the kind of woman I am. The kind who pulls threads, who maps timelines, who does not stop until she has the complete picture. Here is the thing nobody tells you about that kind of mind. Sometimes you find a thread and you know, before you pull it, that what comes loose on the other end is going to change something you are not ready to lose. I knew that. Sitting in that clinic on opening morning, with my father's voice still hanging in the air, I knew exactly what pulling this thread might cost me. I pulled it anyway, because I had spent 22 years making myself smaller to protect things that were never safe to begin with. I was not doing it again. Not even for this. Not even for him. I closed the recording, opened a new document, and I started building the complete picture, the way I built everything that had ever mattered in my life. From the beginning. From the truth. From the part that hurt most. Whatever was at the bottom of this, I was going to find it, and I was going to be standing when I did. Stop. I need you to stop right here with me. If you are new to this story, Parts 1 and 2 are linked in the comments and the description right now. Go watch them first, because what is coming in these 9 chapters will not hit the same without knowing everything this woman already survived to get to this morning. Everything. Go watch them. I will be here when you get back. And if you have been here from the beginning, from the Gold Tassel, from the lecture hall, from the rain, then you already felt what just happened. You already know what that 1 second pause means. And you already know that when Aaliyah says she is going to find something, she finds it. This channel is on its way to 10,000 subscribers. My husband made me a promise. When we hit that number, he has a gift waiting for me. You are the reason that gift gets closer every single day. Right now, drop your country flag in the comments. Tell me what time it is where you are watching this. I want to see every corner of this world represented in this comment section. Wherever you are, you belong in this story. Subscribe if you have not already, because Chapter 1 starts right now. And nothing is what you think it is. I started with the timeline, Not with emotions, not with questions I was not ready to answer, with dates, with facts, with the only language I trusted when everything else felt unsteady beneath me. I pulled every document I could access without alerting anyone. The clinic's founding records, the seized legal files from my father's original incorporation, the case documents from the prosecutor's office that I had helped dismantle 18 months ago. I laid them across my desk in chronological order, and I looked at them the way I looked at a complex diagnosis, not at what was visible, at what was absent, at the gaps between things that should have connected but didn't. The first gap appeared almost immediately. Kangdae's organization had been building a file on my father for years. I knew that. I had found the photographs in his drawer, my father's face, already dated, already documented, 3 months before graduation night. I had accepted his explanation. He knew of my father. He was building a case. The alley was a coincidence. I had accepted that. I was a diagnostician. I should never have accepted anything without checking the foundation beneath it. I pulled the original file, the one I had found in his drawer 18 months ago, and examined and then put back because I had other fires burning, and I trusted what he told me. I read it differently now. The file was not started by Kangdae. The earliest entries, the oldest documents, the foundation of everything built on top of them, predated Kangdae's organization entirely, predated his involvement by years. Someone else had begun this work long before he picked it up. I turned the pages slowly, and then I found it. A single sheet near the back, separate from the organized documentation. Handwritten. The kind of note someone adds to a file when they need to record a decision they made alone and cannot tell anyone about yet. One line. The daughter is different. Keep her out of it. I read it twice. The handwriting was not Kangdae's. I knew his handwriting from 2 years of shared documents and signed agreements and the occasional note left on my desk when he had something to say that he had decided not to say out loud. This was not his. But it was not his father's either. I had seen enough of the elder Park's documentation by now to know the difference. I sat with that for a long time. Someone inside that world had known about me, had made a decision about me, had written one line on a piece of paper that quietly placed a wall between me and everything my father was building against himself, before I ever walked into that alley, before I ever said my name in the rain. Someone had already decided I was worth protecting, and I did not know who. I photographed the page, put the file back exactly as I found it, sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling of my clinic for a long time. I thought about Kangdae's face that morning over coffee, the way he had looked at me across the counter with the expression I had spent 2 years learning to read. Open, present. The man underneath the sealed stillness that most people never got close enough to see. I thought about the night on the floor, his hand over mine. Neither of us saying the thing we both already knew. I thought about how easy it would be to close these files, walk back out into the waiting room, let the clinic opening morning be what it was supposed to be. I thought about all of that. Then I opened a new search on my laptop, and I kept going. Because somewhere between that annotation and my father's voice on a recording and 1 second in an alley in the rain, there was a complete picture. And I was the only person in the world who was going to find it. The handwriting, the timeline, the file that predated everything. Someone had been inside Kangdae's world, protecting her, before he ever knew she existed. Who wrote that line? And what else had they kept from her? I did not confront him. Not yet. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking, Aaliyah, you found a recording. You found an annotation in a handwriting you don't recognize. You have questions that only one person can answer. Why are you sitting across from this man at dinner acting like the ground beneath you is not shifting? Because I was not ready. Not because I was afraid of the answer. I had stopped being afraid of answers a long time ago. In a bathroom at Rosario's, running cold water over my wrists. In a parking lot outside a house that was never a home. In a courtroom where I watched everything my father built come apart at the seams. I had learned in those places that the truth, however much it cost, was always better than the comfortable version of a lie. I was not afraid of the truth. I was not ready because I was not finished building it yet. So I watched him instead. I had always been good at watching. It was the first skill medicine taught me, that what a patient does not say is almost always more important than what they do. The hesitation before the answer. The stillness that is slightly too controlled. The way someone's eyes move when a question catches them somewhere they were not expecting to be found. I watched Kang Dae for 3 days, and here is what I found. He brought me coffee without being asked, every morning, the right temperature, no announcement, just placed on my desk and gone before I could make it mean anything. I had always read this as care. Now I watched it differently. Was it care, or was it management? Was it a man who had learned me, or a man who had studied me? He positioned himself between me and every room entrance when we were in public, always. I had always read this as instinct, the particular alertness of someone who had spent years in dangerous rooms and never fully switched it off. Now I watched it differently. Was it protection, or was it containment? Was he keeping danger out, or keeping me in? He never fully answered a question without redirecting slightly. A small thing. Something most people would never notice, but I noticed now. The way a direct question about his past would land, and he would answer the surface of it and then move the conversation forward in a direction of his own choosing. Smooth. Practiced. The kind of thing that felt like natural conversation until you were looking for it. Then it felt like architecture. I hated what I was doing. I want to be honest about that. I hated sitting across from a man I had chosen, deliberately, completely, with full knowledge of who he was and what his world contained, and watching him like a case study. I hated that the recording had put a lens between me and everything I had learned to trust about him. But I was also a woman who had spent 22 years not looking clearly at the people closest to her. I was not doing that again. On the third evening, something happened. We were sitting at dinner and he said something, casual, almost offhand, that referenced a detail about my life from before the alley. Something specific. The name of a professor who had written my strongest medical school recommendation. Something I had never mentioned to him. Something too precise to be a guess. He did not notice that he had said it, or he did not notice that I had noticed. I kept my face completely still, picked up my water glass, changed the subject in a direction of my own choosing. Two could play at architecture. That night I lay awake and thought about all of it. The annotation, the recording, the detail at dinner, the 1 second in the alley. I thought about the version of this story where everything was exactly what he told me it was. Then I thought about the version where it wasn't. And I understood, lying in the dark with the city moving outside and his apartment quiet around me, that I could not live inside the uncertainty much longer. I needed the complete picture. I needed it soon. Because the longer I sat across from him knowing what I knew, and feeling what I still felt despite what I knew, the more complicated the truth was going to be to hold. She had the recording, the annotation, now a detail that should not exist. How much did he know before that alley? And the real question, the one keeping her awake at 3 a.m., was it possible to love someone completely and still not know who they actually were? On the 4th day, I went back to the original source. Not Kang Dae's files, not the clinic documents, further back than that. I went to the records from my father's original fraud case, the full prosecution archive that I had helped build 18 months ago and that now lived in a legal database I still had access to through my co-signatory status on the counterfiling. I was looking for the timeline, the specific window between when Kang Dae's father started building the original case against my father and when he died. 8 years ago, a car accident that was closed in 3 days. I found something I was not looking for. Inside the prosecution archive, cross-reference from my father's financial records, was a subsidiary file, a funding trail, money that had moved through 3 different accounts over a period of 6 years before the fraud case began. The money was not connected to my father's political campaign, not connected to the clinic, not connected to any of the mechanisms I had already mapped and understood. It was connected to a name I did not recognize, a company, Shell registered, dissolved 4 years ago. The paper trail was thin, deliberately thin, the kind of thinness that takes expertise and intention, but not invisible, not to someone who knew what they were looking for. I followed it for 2 hours. The company connected to a man. The man connected to a network. The network connected, at its outermost edge, through 2 intermediary relationships that would have been invisible to anyone not specifically looking, to the organization my father had described on that recording. Not Kongbei's organization. Another one. Older. Quieter. The kind of structure that does not appear in prosecution files or news coverage because it has spent decades ensuring it never has to. I sat back. I understood something then that I had not understood before. My father was not just a corrupt politician protecting his own empire. He was a man who had been protected by something larger than himself. Something that had been operating quietly behind every door he walked through. Something that had as much interest in keeping him untouchable as he did. And Kongbei had known about this. Not just my father. The structure behind my father. The original file, the one his father had spent 4 years building, was not just about a land deal or a community development fund or a corrupt politician. It was about the network underneath it. The network that had made sure his father's car accident was closed in 3 days. I closed the database, sat in the silence of my clinic for a long time. The picture was almost complete now. I had the recording, the annotation, the dinner detail, the subsidiary file, the network. There was one piece I could not build from documents alone. I needed to hear him say it. I needed to sit across from Kongbei with everything I had found and ask him the one question that the documents could not answer. Not whether he knew. He knew. I was certain of that now. Not whether he had been inside my father's world before I ever walked into that alley. He had. The recording confirmed it. The one question I could not answer from any file or archive or database was why? Why write the annotation? Why keep me out of it? Why, in an alley in the rain, bleeding in the mud, with every reason to use me the way my father had always used me, did he look at my face and make a different decision? I needed to hear him say it, and I needed to be looking at him when he did. I picked up my phone. I put it back down. One more day. One more piece. I was not going to that conversation with almost the complete picture. I was going with everything. The network behind her father, the car accident that killed his father, the file that had taken 4 years to build. She was almost there. One more piece. But sometimes, the last piece finds you before you find it. She was already there when I walked out of my first consultation, sitting in the 3rd chair from the left in the waiting room I had designed specifically to feel like somewhere a woman could breathe. Warm lighting, chairs with actual cushions, a small table with water and something to read that was not a 3-year-old magazine about people whose lives looked nothing like theirs. I had thought about every detail of that room. I had not thought about this. She was in her mid-30s, composed in the way people are composed when composure is the only thing they have left, and they are holding it with both hands. 2 children beside her, a boy and a girl. Young. The boy was looking at the floor. The girl was looking at everything with the particular attention of a child who has learned that new rooms require assessment before relaxation. My receptionist looked at me from across the desk with an expression that said she would not give a name. She asked specifically for you. I looked at the woman. She looked back at me. Not the way a patient looks at a doctor. The way someone looks at a person they have been working up the courage to face for a very long time. I walked over. I said, "Can I help you?" She said, "Your father is my children's father too." The waiting room did not change. The lighting stayed warm, the water was still on the table, the receptionist was still at the desk, and there were two other patients in chairs on the other side of the room who had no idea that the floor had just opened beneath me. I kept my face completely clinical. I said, "Come with me." I took her to the consultation room at the back, closed the door, sat across from her the way I sat across from difficult cases. Steady, present, not performing calm, actually finding it in the part of me that had been trained for exactly this, for the thing you do not see coming, for the moment that requires you to function before you are ready. She told me everything. 9 years. My father had maintained a separate account, quiet, untraceable, for the children. She had not come looking for him. He had found her in the specific way powerful men find women they want kept separate from their official lives. Careful at first, then comfortable, then permanent in the way things become permanent when a man believes he will never be held accountable. When he got sick, the account stopped. No warning, no arrangement, just stopped. She had nowhere to turn. She had built her life around a structure that disappeared the moment he no longer needed to maintain it. Someone had told her about the clinic, about me. She had come because she had no one else. I looked at her hands on the table, then at the children through the glass partition. The boy had found something to look at on the ceiling. The girl had taken out a small notebook and was drawing something with serious concentration. They did not choose this, no more than I chose my father. I said, "Did he ever talk about me?" She looked at her hands. "He said you were the difficult one, the one who thought she was better than the family, the one who walked away when things got hard." The same story, the same constructed narrative deployed in two completely different rooms to two completely different women to keep both of us exactly where he needed us. I sat with that for a long moment. Then my phone buzzed on the table between us, my sister's name on the screen. A message. "I need to see you today. I found something in Dad's things. Aaliyah, it's about Leo. It's about everything. Please?" I looked at the woman across from me. I looked at the children through the glass. I looked at my sister's message. 3 threads, all of them pulling toward the same center, all of them arriving on the same morning in the same room as if the story had decided, enough waiting. Everything lands today. I put my phone face down. I looked at the woman. "I need you to come back on Friday," I said. "Not as a patient, as someone I need to finish a conversation with. Can you do that?" She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across her face. Not relief exactly. Something more careful than relief. The expression of a woman who has been disappointed by so many open doors that she cannot fully trust one yet. "Yes," she said quietly. I walked her back to the waiting room. I watched her take the children by the hands and walk through the front door. The girl looked back at me once before they turned the corner. I held that look for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called my sister back. "I need to stop here, because I know what you are feeling right now. I know. The woman, the children, the sister's message, the recording still playing in the back of your mind. You thought part 3 was going to be the easy one, the victory lap, the part where Aaliyah finally gets to breathe. It is not that part. Drop your country flag in the comments right now. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what time it is. Because wherever you are in this world, what this woman is about to find out in Chapter 5 is going to make you put your hand over your mouth. Subscribe if you have not already, and do not go anywhere. My sister was already at the clinic when I got back from my last consultation, sitting in my office, not the waiting room, my office, because my receptionist knew her by now and had let her in without asking, which told me something about how she had looked when she arrived. Not put together, not composed. The kind of face that makes people step aside without being asked. She stood up when I walked in. She had a folder in her hands. The kind of folder you carry carefully when the contents are the kind of thing you are afraid to set down somewhere and forget. I closed the door. I sat down. She did not sit. She stood in the middle of my office and looked at me the way she had looked at me in the living room 18 months ago. The first time she had looked at me like a sister instead of a competitor. And I understood before she opened her mouth that whatever was in that folder had been costing her something to carry. "How long have you had that?" I asked. 3 weeks, she said. I found it going through his things after the diagnosis. I didn't know what to do with it. I kept telling myself I needed to understand it fully before I brought it to you. But I think I was also just afraid of what it meant. She put the folder on my desk. I opened it. A financial agreement. Formal. Signed. Dated. 4 years before graduation day. The names at the top were my father's and Leo's father's. I read it slowly. Every line. The way I read everything that mattered. Completely, without skipping toward the conclusion, without letting what I feared color what I was actually seeing. When I finished, I put it down. Leo had not been a boyfriend who cheated. He had been a placement. Deliberate. Arranged. My father had identified what he needed. A man close enough to Aaliyah to monitor her, manage her emotional attention, and ensure she remained too personally invested in her private life to look clearly at what was happening around her. Leo's father had agreed in exchange for financial arrangements that had benefited his family for 4 years. 4 years. Our entire relationship. Every dinner. Every conversation about the future. Every moment I had spent in the library while everyone else went to parties, telling myself it was for us, for what we were building together, had been constructed around me. Not with me, around me. I sat with that. My sister watched me with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a verdict while already knowing the sentence. "Did you know from the beginning?" I asked. "No," she said. "I suspected something was wrong with him, the way he looked at Dad sometimes, like they had an understanding I wasn't supposed to see. I started looking about 2 years before graduation. And when you found out? He would have destroyed you quietly if you had tried to leave through the front door," she said. "You know that. You know what Dad had ready. The forged signatures, the documents, everything he had prepared to use against you if you became a problem. If I had come to you with a piece of paper, you would have confronted it like you confronted everything, directly, and he would have buried you before you got to the end of the sentence." The room was very quiet. "So you chose graduation day," I said. She looked at her hands. "I chose the most public, irreversible moment I could find. Something you could not be gaslit about. Something you saw with your own eyes in a room full of witnesses. Something that made leaving the only option, before he could use any of it against you." I looked at my sister, at this woman who had sat across from me at a dinner table and let me believe the worst about her for 2 years, who had carried this alone, who had made an impossible calculation in an impossible situation, and had chosen, above everything else, to make sure I got out. "You should have told me," I said. "We could have faced it together." "I know," she said. Her voice broke slightly on it. "I know that now." We sat in the silence for a long time, 2 women who grew up in the same house and survived it differently, and were only now, finally, sitting on the same side of everything. Then I told her about the woman in the waiting room, the 2 children. Her face told me she already knew. She had found the account records in the same folder. She had been going to tell me today. Of course she had. I looked at my sister across my desk in the clinic I had built on the wreckage of a man who had underestimated both of us. I thought about everything he had constructed, the arrangements, the placements, the contingency plans, the cages he had built for every woman in his life and called by a different name. He had spent 30 years believing he was the most powerful person in every room he entered. He had spent 30 years surrounded by women who were surviving him, and he never once saw any of us clearly enough to understand what we were actually capable of. The betrayal that started everything was never a betrayal. It was the only door her sister could find. And now both of them were standing on the other side of it. But there was still one conversation left, the one she had been building toward since the moment she pressed play. I went to him that evening. I did not call ahead. I did not prepare what I was going to say. I had spent 5 days building the complete picture, and I knew every piece of it, and the only thing left was to sit across from him and let the picture speak. He was in his office when I arrived, door open, the specific openness that meant available even when it looked like the opposite. I walked in without knocking, sat down across from him without waiting to be invited, put the recording device on the desk between us. I did not press play. I did not explain it. I looked at his face. He looked at the device, then at my face, and something moved behind his eyes. Not panic, not guilt exactly. Something more complicated than both. The expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific moment to arrive and is now sitting inside it and finding that it feels different from how he prepared for it. He knew what was on it. He knew that I knew. I asked him one question. When did you turn? Not, how could you? Not, did you lie to me? Not, was any of it real? Just the one question that mattered. The only piece I could not build from any file or archive or database. He was quiet for a long time. Then he told me. He took the arrangement with my father because the political network gave him access to people connected to the men who had buried his father's case. He had spent 2 years trying to do it the right way. Complaints, reviews, lawyers, and every door had closed before he reached the end of the corridor. He needed to be inside the structure to dismantle it. My father had offered resources and cover to a young organization that was still building. He had accepted because proximity was the only weapon he had left. He had not expected to find me inside it. Within 3 months, my father had mentioned me, casually, comfortably. The way powerful men speak about the pieces on their board when they believe the room is safe. Not as a daughter, as an instrument. A liability he kept current because it was useful. A signature he had already copied into documents that were waiting in a drawer. He described you the way you describe something you own, Kangde said. And then he told me, if anyone comes for me, the girl takes the fall. She's a doctor, clean record, nobody will question the paper trail. The room was completely still. That was the night, he said. That specific conversation. I went back to the file that evening and I wrote the annotation. The daughter is different. Keep her out of it. His handwriting, not his mother's, his. I had never met you, he said. I only knew your name and what your father said about you in that room, and what he said told me everything I needed to know about who you actually were. I looked at him. He called me a liability, I said. Yes. And you heard that and decided the opposite. He said nothing. He did not need to. I sat with everything for a long moment. The recording, the annotation, the dinner detail, the professor's name he had said without thinking, the subsidiary file and the network behind my father and the car accident that killed his father and the 12 years that had led to an alley in the rain. I sat with all of it. Then I asked the question underneath everything. In the alley, when I said my name, that 1 second. Yes, he said, simply, without flinching. I recognized it. And you still let me help you. You were already helping me, he said. You were already on your knees in the mud before I could say anything. And I looked at your face. He stopped. Something moved across his expression, unguarded, unmanaged, the real version of him that most people never got close enough to see. I looked at your face, and I understood that whatever your father had planned for you had not touched the person you actually were. Not yet. So you made a decision. I made a decision. The room held its silence. I stood up, picked up the recording device, put it in my bag. He watched me, completely still, waiting for the verdict with the particular stillness of a man who has learned that some things cannot be managed, they can only be endured. I said, I need a day. I walked out. I drove home, sat in my apartment on Meridian Street, 3rd floor, south-facing, the kitchen the right size for someone who actually cooked, and I sat with everything until the city outside went quiet and the only sound was my own breathing. I thought about a girl in a parking lot counting to 11 because counting was the only anchor she had. I thought about every door she had walked through since. I thought about what it meant that the man she had chosen had made a decision about her. quietly, alone, in a room she was not in, before he ever knew her face. I thought about the fact that her father had tried to use her as a weapon, and the man across from him had heard that and turned himself into a wall instead. I sat with all of it until I knew what I was going to do. The next morning, I walked into his office, sat down across from him, opened my laptop, got to work. I did not say a single word. Neither did he. But I heard him exhale, slowly, completely, for the first time since I had put the recording on his desk. And that exhale told me everything that neither of us needed to say out loud. She had the complete picture now, every piece of it. But there was one thing she did not know yet. One thing nobody had told her. One thing that was going to reframe not just the last 2 years, but the very first moment of the very first part. And it was waiting for her. It had been waiting for a very long time. He asked me to come somewhere with him on a Saturday morning. He did not explain where. That was not unusual. Kang Dae moved through the world with the particular economy of a man who did not believe in over-preparing people for things that needed to be experienced rather than described. I followed him. We drove for 20 minutes into a part of the city I had been through but never stopped in. Quiet streets, old trees, houses that had been lived in for decades by people who had decided this was where they were staying. The kind of neighborhood that does not announce itself because it does not need to. He pulled up outside a house at the end of a clean, tree-lined street and stopped the car. He did not get out immediately. He sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel, and I noticed, because I noticed everything about him now, that this was the only time I had ever seen him pause before entering a space. He walked into every room in his world without hesitation. Boardrooms, courtrooms, confrontations. He moved through all of it with the same unhurried certainty. Whatever was inside this house, it was the one place in the world where Kang Dae needed a moment. I did not say anything. We got out. He knocked once. The door opened. A woman in her early 60s, silver-streaked hair pulled back. Upright posture, the kind that suggested it had become habit long ago. Eyes that were sharp and warm simultaneously, in the way that only comes from a life that has held both hardness and gentleness, and refused to let either one win completely. She looked at me, and I felt something move through me that I could not immediately name. Not recognition exactly, more like the feeling of something familiar appearing in an unfamiliar context. The specific cognitive dissonance of seeing something in the wrong place and knowing you know it from somewhere, but being unable to locate where. Then it landed, and when it landed, I understood why Kang Dae had needed that moment in the car. I knew this face. I had known this face for 3 years. I had been carrying it in a specific corner of my memory since the day I stood at a podium with a speech I had rewritten 17 times and gave it to 400 people who did not know I had been falling apart for 3 hours. The woman in the 5th row, the one who cried. The one I had noticed out of 400 people, out of every face performing the appropriate responses, every expression calibrated to the occasion, because her tears were the only ones in that room that were completely real. I stood in the doorway of her house and looked at her, and understood something that rearranged every piece of the picture I had spent 5 days building. She had been there deliberately. She had known about my father. She had known what Kang Dae was building. She had come to that graduation, to that specific ceremony, that specific auditorium, to see the daughter of the man who had destroyed her family. And instead she had watched a young woman survive something catastrophic in real time. Swallow glass and smile and keep going, and never once let the auditorium see the fracture. She had gone home and told her son, "The daughter is not like the father. Watch her." Kang Dae's mother. We sat in her living room for a long time, the 3 of us. The specific quietness of people who have arrived at a conversation that has been building across years, and do not want to rush it, now that it is finally here. She told me about her husband, the community lawyer with the warm eyes who had spent 4 years building a case that nobody with power wanted built, who had believed, genuinely, stubbornly, all the way to the end, that the right document in the right hands could protect people who had no one else standing between them and the powerful. She told me about the accident. She told me about the 3 days. She told me about her son, 24 years old, sitting in his father's house going through boxes, finding the files, understanding what had been buried and what it had cost, and deciding, quietly, with no announcement and no ceremony, that it was not going to stay buried. Then she reached into the drawer beside her chair. She placed an envelope on the table between us. "He wrote this 6 months before he died," she said. "He told me to keep it until the work was finished. Until whoever Kang De chose to stand beside him was sitting in the room." She looked at me steadily. "He didn't know your name, he couldn't have, but he knew the kind of person it would need to be." She pushed the envelope toward me, not toward Kang De, toward me. My hands were steady when I picked it up. I do not know how. I opened it carefully, unfolded the pages, 3 of them, handwritten, the same precise, careful handwriting I had seen in the annotation. I read it slowly, all of it. The work he had done, the people he had tried to protect, the network he had mapped and documented and preserved in files that his son would one day find and carry forward. The names, the accounts, the land that had been taken, the families that had been displaced. All of it recorded with the care of a man who knew he might not be the one to deliver it, but needed to make sure it survived him. And at the bottom of the last page, 1 paragraph, set apart from everything else. "To whoever is standing beside my son when this is finished, you were not an accident. I don't know who you are or how you found each other, but I know this work does not complete itself. It requires someone who understands what is worth protecting and why. Someone who has already proven, before they knew they were being asked, that they will not walk away from hard things. If you are reading this, you have already proven it. The clinic, the community, the people who were supposed to be protected and weren't, that is yours now. Not as a burden, as the thing you were already building before you knew whose ground you were building it on." I folded the letter. I held it in my hands for a moment. Then I looked at Kang De. He was watching me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not the managed stillness, not the careful openness he had learned to give me across 2 years of choosing each other. Something older than both of those. Something that looked like a man seeing, for the first time, the full shape of something he had been carrying so long he had forgotten it had a shape. I held the letter out to him. He took it. He read his father's words for the first time with me sitting beside him in his mother's living room on a Saturday morning, and I watched his face, and I did not look away because some moments are not meant to be given privacy. Some moments are meant to be witnessed. She had come to this room expecting information. She had found something that could not be filed or documented or mapped on a timeline. The story had not started in an alley in the rain. It had not started on graduation night. It had started in a 5th row. It had started with a woman who cried at a stranger's speech and went home and told her son, "Watch her." And the stranger had never known. Until now. My sister called on a Tuesday evening. Not dramatically. Not with the urgency of someone delivering news. The specific quiet of someone who has been waiting to make a call and has finally decided that waiting longer will not make it easier. "He's asking for you," she said. "It's time." I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment after she hung up. I looked at the photograph on my clinic desk. Kang De's father. The community lawyer with the warm eyes and the briefcase and the 4 years of careful work that had refused to stay buried. I had looked at this photograph every day since his mother gave it to me, and I still found something new in it each time. Today what I found was something simple. He had gone. Without finishing. Without knowing if it would ever be finished. He had done the work anyway. I put on my coat. The hospital was 20 minutes away. I drove it without music. Just the city moving around me, unhurried, indifferent, the ordinary continuing machinery of a place that did not pause for personal reckonings. I turned into the corridor for the private ward, and stopped. There was a woman sitting outside the door at the end of the hall, 2 children beside her, a boy and a girl. The girl had her small notebook open on her knee, the same notebook she had been drawing in the day she sat in my waiting room, and she was drawing with the same serious concentration as if wherever she was, whatever room, the work of filling the page was the most important thing. The woman looked up when she heard my footsteps. We looked at each other, not with hostility, not with the complicated performance of two women navigating a man who had put them both in an impossible position. Just two people who recognized in each other the specific exhaustion of having survived the same architecture from different rooms inside it. I sat down in the chair across from her. The boy looked at me briefly and then back at the floor. The girl kept drawing. "He told you about me too?" the woman asked. "He told me I was the difficult one," I said. "The one who thought she was better than the family." She almost smiled, not with humor, with recognition. "He told me you were cold," she said, "that you never appreciated what you had." We sat with that for a moment. "What did you actually have?" she asked quietly. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. "A forged signature on a document that was supposed to end my career," I said. "A family that called it protection." She nodded slowly, the nod of someone fitting a piece into a picture that has been missing it. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "About the children." I looked at the girl with the notebook. She had drawn something that looked like a house with very large windows. Every window had a person in it. "I've opened a clinic," I said, "on the ground where the damage was done. When you're ready, not for him, not for what he owed you, for them. The door is open." She looked at her children. Something moved across her face that I recognized. Not relief. The more careful thing that comes before relief. The first loosening of a grip that has been held so long the hand has forgotten how to open. She nodded. I stood up. I walked to the end of the corridor. I opened the door. My father was small in the bed. That was the first thing. Not physically smaller, diminished. The specific diminishment of a man whose entire existence had been constructed around the projection of power, and who now had no mechanism left to project it from. The political confidence was gone. The steady hands were gone. The voice that had walked back into my clinic on a recording and rearranged my understanding of 2 years of my life? Quieter now. Careful. The voice of a man who had finally run out of rooms to fill. He said my name. I did not fill the silence for him. I sat down in the chair beside his bed, and I looked at him the way I looked at difficult cases. Clearly. Without flinching. Without the softening I had spent 22 years applying to everything that hurt too much to see at full brightness. I saw him completely. Not the father I had spent a lifetime trying to earn. Not the man at the restaurant with the steady hands and the steak knife and the document with my forged signature. Not the voice on the recording. Not the architect of arrangements and cages and contingency plans. Just a man. At the end of something. In a bed that would not remember him. He tried to speak. I said, "I met her in the corridor, and her children." His face moved through several things very quickly. None of them were surprise. The surprise had run out some time ago. What was left was something older and less manageable. The specific expression of a man who has finally run out of narrative. I looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not here because you're dying," I said. "I'm not here to give you something to hold on to. I'm here because I needed to look at you one final time and make sure I was free of you." I stood. "I think I am." I walked out. I did not look back. I did not walk fast. I did not need to. I walked at the pace of a woman who has put down the last thing she was carrying and is no longer in a hurry to get away from the weight of it, because the weight is gone. I passed the woman in the corridor. I looked at the girl with the notebook. She looked up at me, those serious, assessing eyes, and then back down at her page. I touched the woman's shoulder once as I passed. Just once. Just enough. I walked out of that hospital into the evening air, and I stood on the pavement for a moment, and I breathed. Just breathed. The city moved around me. A bus, a couple arguing quietly about something that would not matter tomorrow, a man walking a dog that was in no hurry to go anywhere. I was not crying. I was not triumphant. I was not performing either of those things for an audience that was not there. I was just a woman standing on a pavement in the evening air, having set down the last weight she was carrying. And it felt like nothing I had a word for yet. But I knew, standing there with the city moving around me, that whatever the word was, it was mine, completely and permanently mine. And no one, not one single person in this world, would ever take it from her again. She had walked in, she had walked out. She had not looked back. There was one chapter left, and it was not about what she had survived. It was about what she was going to build. 1 month later, the clinic was full. Not overwhelmingly, not chaotically. Full in the way a space is full when it has found its purpose and is living inside it correctly. Every room doing exactly what it was designed to do. Every person who walked through the front door finding what they came for. The whole thing operating with the specific, quiet efficiency of something that was always supposed to exist and has finally been allowed to. My sister came on Saturdays, not as staff, not officially. She just came and sat at the front desk and helped people fill in forms and made sure the water on the waiting room table was always fresh and talked to the children who came in with their mothers in the particular easy way she had always had with people who needed to be put at ease before they could ask for what they needed. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. I had just never been in a position to see it before. The woman from the corridor, I had started thinking of her by her name now, Yemi, had brought the children in on a Wednesday 3 weeks after the hospital. Not for anything specific, just to see the space, just to let the children see it. The girl had brought her notebook and had sat in the waiting room drawing the clinic with the same serious concentration she brought to everything. When she finished, she had walked over and put the drawing on the reception desk without saying anything and walked back to her seat. My receptionist had framed it. It was hanging on the wall beside the door now. A building with very large windows, a person in every window. I looked at it every morning when I arrived. Kong Day came on Thursdays, not announced, just present, the way he had always been present. The way I had come to understand was simply how he moved through the world when it came to the things that mattered to him. He sat in my office for an hour, and we talked about everything and nothing in the particular way of two people who had chosen each other through the hardest version of the choosing, and had come out the other side knowing that the ordinary conversations, coffee, the city, what was happening and what wasn't, were not small things. They were the whole thing. On a Thursday evening 4 weeks after the hospital, I was still at my desk when he arrived, later than usual. He sat down across from me and I looked at him immediately because I had learned to read the difference between his presences, and this one was carrying something. Not heavy, not urgent. The particular quality of something he had been turning over in his mind for a few days and had finally decided was ready to be said out loud. I waited. He said, "My mother gave me the rest of my father's files last week, the ones she had kept separate. Personal ones, notes he made outside the formal case documentation." I put down my pen. "There was one from the last month before he died," he said. "A single page. He was writing about the case, about what it would mean if it ever finished, about the community, the people, the land." He paused. He wrote one line at the bottom that was not about the case. He looked at me across the desk. He wrote, "The work does not end with the filing. It ends when the ground where the damage was done grows something the damage could not have predicted, something that serves the people who were never served. That is when it is finished, not before." The clinic was quiet around us. Outside, the city moved the way it always did. Unhurried, indifferent, honest. I looked at the drawing on the wall, the building with the large windows, the person in every window. I thought about a community lawyer who had spent 4 years trying to protect people who had no one standing between them and the powerful. I thought about a girl who had dropped a speech on a lecture hall floor and walked into a storm with nowhere to go and stopped for a stranger bleeding in the rain because her hands knew what to do even when everything else was breaking. I thought about every door she had walked through since, every door she had opened, every door she had refused to close behind her. He finished it. I said quietly. Kangdae looked at me. Your father finished it, I said. He just didn't know what it was going to look like when it was done. Something settled in Kangdae's face then. Something I had seen moving toward that settlement across months and years. The long, slow arrival of a man putting down a weight he had been carrying since he was 24 years old in his father's house going through boxes. It landed, quietly, without ceremony, the way the most important things always did. We sat in the silence for a while, neither of us feeling the need to fill it. Then, from the front of the clinic, a sound, a knock at the door. We both looked up. The clinic was closed. It was Thursday evening. There was no appointment, no staff left, just Aaliyah and Kangdae and the drawing on the wall, and 12 years of work that had finally grown into something nobody could have predicted. I stood up. I walked to the front of the clinic. I put my hand on the door handle. And I paused for just a moment. Not from hesitation, not from fear, but from the specific awareness of a woman who has learned to be present in the moments that matter. To not rush through them, to let them be exactly what they are before they become the next thing. I had spent 22 years running from rooms. I was not running anymore. I opened the door. And that is where I leave you. Not because the story is over, but because some doors are not mine to walk through for you. Aaliyah opened that door. What she found on the other side, that belongs to her. And maybe, if the story calls for it, to a part 4. But before you go, I need you to do something. This story, all 3 parts, took everything. Every word was written to make you feel something real, something that stayed with you after the audio ended, something that made you think about the women in your life who have been swallowing glass and smiling, the ones who kept going when nobody came after them, the ones who built something on the ground where the damage was done. If this story found you, share it. Not just this part, all 3 parts. Send it to every woman you know who needs to hear Aaliyah's name. Send it to every person who has ever sat in a parking lot counting to 11 because counting was the only anchor they had. Send it to the group chat. Send it to your sister. Send it to the friend who has been quiet lately. This story was built for them. And if you have been here from the beginning, from the gold tassel hitting her cheek, from the lecture hall, from the rain, then you already know what this story gave you. Drop it in the comments. Tell me what Aaliyah meant to you across these 3 parts. Tell me the moment that stopped you. Tell me the chapter that made you put your hand over your mouth. I read every single one. This channel is on its way to 10,000 subscribers, and every comment, every share, every flag in this comment section is what gets us there. My husband's promise is waiting at that number, and you are the reason it gets closer every single day. Drop your flag, drop your time. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. Subscribe if you are not already. Share all 3 parts. And thank you for staying, for watching, for being the kind of person who needed this story to exist. Aaliyah was never alone. Because of you, she never will be.